All righty. Looks like we're live. Good morning, everyone. Today is Tuesday, March 1st, 2022. Welcome to the Above Board Show, the only podcast, the weekly podcast dedicated to cybersecurity leaders. Join the conversation as our panel of industry veterans and insightful guests provides leadership insights and breaks down current events so that you can have a more engaging and more fruitful relationship with your C-suite and the board. I'm Rafal, and joining me today are my co-hosts, Grant Sewell, Mr. Gary Latham. Our guest, we'll introduce in a second, is Mr. Patrick Dennis. If you don't know him, I don't know what part of the world you've been living under. This show is part of the Down to Security Rabbit Hole family of podcasts in collaboration with the Security Advisor Alliance, and I encourage you to check both of those out. The show is being broadcast from the Above Board Show page on LinkedIn. So thanks for finding us. If you haven't followed us yet, please do. You can catch every week our show. And thanks for joining us. So I'm going to start with letting Patrick introduce himself because he's got one heck of a colorful resume. Patrick, 30-second version of who you are.
Quick trip through the background then. Grew up in tech, loved to program, 2600 in paperback. I always make that joke for the handful of old folks that are left out there. Went through big tech in my founding years, EMC Oracle, now multi-time CEO, done infrastructure CEO jobs, application CEO jobs, and did guidance software. That's where Raf and I met, old school forensic folks. And most recently, CEO at Extra Hop. So looking forward to today's conversation. I think I've seen the CEO job from kind of a broad suite of vendors, and it's a different gig. I think we're probably going to talk about that today.
Yeah. So in the spirit of having of the show, right, having a better relationship with your board and your C-suite, you are the C-suite, and you've been at that point where you've had to have a relationship with the C-suite. I'm going to start off with a really interesting one. Kind of go into left field here to start off with. What do you think is the one thing from your CEO chair that you have that's new, or that's something that when you were the CISO or looking at it from the security perspective that you didn't quite know, or that you kind of wished if you can go back and tell younger or previous experience, Patrick, that you would say?
So, in tech, a lot of times skills atrophy. So like when I went to college for programming, the languages you program in today are radically different, right? So the skills curve atrophies. Like it's the exact opposite in security. This is one of the few places in tech where when you start in security, the body of work increases your value over time. And, it always confuses me, right? Because we're always short on people that want to play in this space. And yet this is one of the most durable sets of skills you can build in tech. And you get to make a difference in the world. If I had known that way back when, I may have charted my course differently.
That's really interesting. Yeah, the shortage of skills is something we're all intimately familiar with. It's amazing. So, Patrick, this notion of being a CISO for a technology company or a vendor company, let's say, a vendor business, seems to me to have a couple of different parts associated with it. Correct me if I'm wrong, but one of them certainly feels like you got to worry about your own business, right? The security of your own business and your assets and your IP and all that. What I categorize as traditional CISO sort of work.
Sure.
Then I gotta believe, and I sure hope this is true, that you're also kind of an internal consultant to whatever your product or services or tech that's getting developed, right? Because you're the real world. So I hope that comes into play.
Yep.
And then the third part of it that must weigh on vendor CISO is, hey, all these guys that are buying my products, I've got some kinship with them and some shared responsibility with them. So how in the hell do you balance all of that stuff in a role like the ones you've had in the past? How do you do it?
Yeah, so if you're the CEO and you're looking at your CISO, and Gary, you hit on the three dimensions exactly right. Those are the exact three dimensions. Like, do you need a CISO that's still minded for protecting you from insider threat, for instance, which Raf knows, I feel pretty strongly about. You absolutely do. And by the way, those insider threats are a big deal in these cases because generally those people have access to software intellectual property, at least in the businesses that I'm in, right? So There's
Right.
definitely kind of traditional CISO work, right? That's one. Two, because you're selling a product, and oftentimes I've been fortunate enough to work for companies that are selling products to companies that are substantially larger than mine. Like, it's no secret I've sold to the largest banks in the world, the largest airlines in the world, right? They have rigorous security programs too, right? So your point two is important, which is you have to hold your product teams accountable to a high level of security performance if you're going to sell whatever your product is to one of those customers, right? So at Alvaria, my last company, contact center company, that contact center is used for all the large airlines in the world, right? So there's a security standard there. Your third point is probably the one that it's like super insightful to hear it from somebody on the outside. I wouldn't necessarily expect somebody to understand this, but picture all those customers, and let's pretend you have 1,000. So there's 1,000 CISOs that are evaluating your product, right? And so, you framed it as kinship. I think that's true. Like, we build relationships oftentimes as a supplier or a vendor with those CISOs. But the other thing that gets lost a lot is you can't build a product that's going to meet the exact security requirements or policies for 1,000 customers, right? And so there's, like, if I'm really honest, the super interesting distinction is how do you kind of impedance match your own internal security thinking with a large commercial bank's security thinking in a way that lets them procure a product from you and still feel safe and secure. That third element is like, that's where the rubber really meets the road.
So, it's interesting. We had a very similar conversation last night on the Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. And if you look at those dimensions and our traditional technical folks, as the CEO, how hard is it to hire a CISO that can do all of that stuff?
Short answer, it's impossible. So there's a couple of strategies that you use, right? Or at least strategies I'd recommend. So first of all, if the product team is not internalizing security as part of the product, then that has to happen. That may mean things like you need to drop Scrum teams into certain product development groups that are focused on the security of your product. It may mean that somebody's writing security standards for your products internally, just like we would have done historically for like IT, right? But now these are how the DevOps team is going to consume them, right? So you can't really just put it on your CISO, right? You've got to start to like feather that down into the organization and do it in a measurable way. Now, the thing I would tell you that has to morph for a CISO, for a long time in our business, we've all talked about friction, right? Like, the best CISOs figure out how you increase security posture and do it in a way that doesn't equivalently or more increase the friction, right? CISOs in a product company have to understand that friction point at a much more detailed level. And so you may find that the skill set or background for that CISO is a bit different because they have to have an appreciation for product. And if they don't have an appreciation for product and friction, it's a hard job to do. So it's an impossible job to find in one person. You got to find the right person that understands like what you're doing in your company. And then you need to like support them in disseminating some of the things that they think are important, into the development teams. I hope that kind of makes sense, Aaron.
Yeah, no, I think that was kind of the conversation we were having last night. It's an impossible feat, but it's got to be more than one person. It's more than one role at this point.
Yeah. Are you open to an example? So one of the companies I ran, for instance, Log4 asterisk, whatever we want to call it now, right? Landed, and let's face it, right? Like, all of our collective Twitter blew up that morning, and everything went crazy, right? So let me tell you what the job was like for a CEO that day. So I showed up in the office and I was like, hey, get the product teams on the horn. I want to know where this is in product. If it is in product, like, how exposed is it in product? How many customers have it in product? So just think of it like the dimensions changed. Most people were focused on where is this deployed, inside of corporate Acme Corp, right? I was thinking, how many customers did we ship this to, right? and what can we do to remediate it inside of those environments? And if you think about it, it's a pretty difficult second order problem, because now we have to fix it at the company and we have to go deploy it at someone else's company, going through their change control, et cetera. So, it's the same set of problems we've all faced before, but there's a multiplier effect when you have a customer base that's, difficult to kind of get your head wrapped around until you've been in the job a couple times.
So did that experience, as an example, change the way you think about structuring, a management team or a security team?
I definitely think that the key customer roles need a much higher degree of security acumen than they've had before. That includes, for instance, it's popular in my line of work to have like a chief customer officer and customer success managers. Like a customer success manager should be keeping customers on current product for a variety of reasons, including the fact we're going to ship them more features and functions to get them more benefit, and because we're going to ship them software that's more secure. There's a change in thinking for more roles now, Gary, in my opinion, where you have to hold yourself as a supplier much more accountable for your customer security posture vis-a-vis your software. And, I take a pretty hard line on it. I always tell everybody, hey, listen, it's our brand on the line at that customer site. So it might be a situation where their security posture is not awesome. Okay, but it's incumbent upon you to make sure if something happens there, it's not because of our technology. That's a much different view, frankly, than I even had my first CEO job. It's changed a lot over the last few years.
Great.
I'm thinking, because this is now, yes, you were concerned about your customers, and obviously that the outside problem is a real one, right? What kind of impact have you had on your customer?
Yeah.
But you got to start. You got to be thinking about, well, heck, what kind of exposure do we have internally to this as well? Because that isn't good. That's not a great place to be either.
No, so this is the part where if you want to ratchet it up even one step further, when you're running a security company, not only are you perhaps more a target, right? This was true at Guidance, where the forensic product was widely used. There are many people that would have wanted, for instance, the source code for the world's leading forensic product. So you can be a target. But also, I think in the future, we need to hold ourselves to a higher standard and try to show people the way a bit more. So, I would argue the future CISO for suppliers and software vendors needs to be something that also can go outbound a bit and tell other customers what they've learned, how to, for instance, use products more effectively, whether those are security products or how to harden products if they're application products. There's a role for the CISO to go say, if I'm drinking my own champagne with Acme supplier, I'm the pro, I'm the expert. I give you all the pro tips on how to harden and secure, these tools. That's probably not the thinking today, but it's going to evolve that way.
So as we kind of look at the end of our time here, Patrick, what would be your takeaway here for our CEOs and CISOs and other folks watching today?
A lot of people like to make it easy and say that I am the way I am because I came from a technical background. Like, you don't get that cop out anymore. You can't kick the can anymore. These kind of challenges aren't going away. They're getting more pervasive. They're getting harder to solve. You need to start to think of your security posture as pretty cornerstone to whether or not your software business is viable, because the stakes are super high. So get educated, don't kick the can, support your CISO, make investments. Like, this is the time, no more kind of lip service. People actually really have to reallocate resource. That's what has to happen now.
Well, thanks, Patrick. Really appreciate all of your insights today, and I think it gave us a different perspective to look at than we've seen before. So thanks for joining us. And thanks everybody that tuned in live today. Thanks to everybody who's watching this later. Continue to subscribe to the Above Board Show on LinkedIn to get these notifications for our quick 15-minute touch base every single week. That's Tuesdays at noon Eastern. And suggest questions to us on Twitter, LinkedIn, and other channels for any topics that you want us to address or people that you want us to join. So it's goodbye for now. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next week on the Above Board Show.
Thanks, everybody.